I'd like to tell you a funny story, though at the time it wasn't at all funny. I had a friend who offered me lunch and then at the end suggested that we had a quiet time together, in the belief that since I was supposed to be a Christian, God might tell me a few things that I needed to do. Well, he did. There were 3 things. The first was to confess to my wife that I'd had a flirtation with a young woman at the BBC where I then worked. Fortunately, it had been really a very minor flirtation, but it needed, according to what I thought in the quiet time, to be confessed to my wife, so I did. The second thing was that I should go to our tax authorities in Britain and confess that I had been paying far too little in tax. And the third thing was that I'd been taking far too much in expenses from the BBC, and that I should acquaint the Director General with that fact. Now, as you can imagine, I did not come out of that quiet time a happy man, but it had to be done. My wife was certainly not pleased with the idea that I should go to the tax authorities and confess. She said, "You will go to jail." Anyway, on this occasion I disobeyed her, which was quite rare, and I went to see the tax authorities, actually in a town called Aylesbury. And I was greeted by a young man who had no idea why the economics correspondent of the BBC, which was what I was then, would want to see them. And when I told him that I'd really come to confess that I'd been underpaying on my taxes, he went as white as a sheet. And he simply said, "We have no procedure for this." Anyway, he recovered, and the end product of all that was that I paid back. And this is 40 years ago, so you've got to multiply the figures by 4 or 5 to make them contemporary. I paid back £1,000 in unpaid tax. I did not go to jail. They merely gave me a fine of £50. And on the second occasion when I went to see them, it was perfectly clear that everybody in the building knew the story, because they all greeted me as if I were an old friend. And when I went to the BBC, the Director General, who was a man called Charles Curran, he tried to be kind. He said, "We always underpaid you. Take it as a late payment." So I said, "I'm afraid that won't do, Charles." "Okay," he said. "We'll put it into the War Memorial Fund," whatever that was and is. So that was that. It was painful. It's easy to make light of it now, but I think it probably took a certain courage to do it. The total cost was about £2,000, which was all the savings we had. We were completely flat broke afterwards. But 6 months later, completely out of the blue, I won 2 literary prizes, total value £2,500, which I calculate as a return of 25%, which is not bad over 6 months. But far more important, I had a son who was 7 years old at the time, and I thought he was old enough to know what I was doing. He's a rather pompous little fellow at that time. And so when I told him, he said to me, well, he said, if you'd been honest in the first place, you wouldn't be in trouble now. So I said, well, thank you very much. And then, to my astonishment, 6 weeks later, he came downstairs looking exceedingly unhappy. And I said, what on earth is wrong, Patrick? And there was a long, long pause. And then he said, I've been stealing sweets from the local shop. Came as a great shock to me because he was an exceptionally well-behaved little boy. Just shows what can happen underneath these very happy surfaces. So I said, what do you think you should do? He said, God has told me that I should give Mr. Gotelier, who was the grocer, all my money. So I said, how much money have you got? He said, 30p. And that morning he went down and he said, Mr. Gotelier, I've been stealing sweets from your shop, and here is the money. Grocer was in tears, actually. Wouldn't take the money to begin with. But Patrick said, but Mr. Gotelier, God has told me that I should pay the money back. So then the grocer took the money. And that, I think, really was the beginning of what has been a very firm faith, become a very firm faith in the boy. And the point of the story really is that the price of honesty is obedience. You have to do what you're told. But what you get back is freedom, and it seems the freedom of other people as well, at least one other person. So that's the story.